Hello everyone, it's Ashra Hero here. Today, I'll be discussing Kinji Hakari, a character from a niche manga called Jujutsu Kaisen. Do not let the title of the video give you a wrong idea, as this video will be a barely disguised ramble of my perspectives in regards to various aspects of his character, ranging from his looks, ideals, behaviors, powers, and evolution of said powers. So sit back and allow me to waste 30 minutes of your day. Who is Kinji Hakari? The shortest answer will be he is a third-year Tokyo High student currently on an indefinite suspension for being a miscreant to a couple of Jujutsu higher-ups. At least, this is the official verdict about him, but since then, we've heard or seen several others, including himself, put him in different lights, like a gambling addict that has centered his being around gambling with his life and testing his luck against the chances of death, a person who's at his most high when helping others, a person who has no fear of isolation and has discarded his humanity, a mob boss that uses the desires of others as his sole source of entertainment. In this video, I'll try to determine who he is, and by the end of it, we will see if he's any of that, all of that, or none of that but something new and entirely different. I will start by looking into his first interactions with Yuji, starting with his literal first introduction. When we are first introduced to Hakari, the literal first two scenes involves him, first, pulling a con by rigging a real-time match going on in his self-made fight club. Then the following scene involves him attempting to con Yuji. Luckily, Yuji saw through this no thanks to any ingenuity of his, but owing to his complete disinterest in any form of vanity at that point, due to his harrowing Shibuya experience, because let's be real, early manga free-spirited Yuji would have leapt at that bit at the drop of a hat. In short, Yuji lacked what Hakari labels as fever, the source of excitement that both drives the scammer to try hitting big by cheating people and the scammed being stupidly naive enough at the offer on the slight chance of also hitting big. He then goes on to say, there is a more direct way of exchanging this fever, which Yuji replies with gambling, a practice that has both parties involved voluntarily agree to cheat or be cheated. This subconsciously brings about the elimination of guilt due to the perceived consent of both parties. This said consent, entailing a transparency, gives them the illusion of both being in control of their actions to equal degrees and both being at the same mercy of luck for things in the game out of their control. Then he goes on to yap about how fever is gambling and the whole of life itself is gambling and love is control. This sounds nonsensical at first glance, and I'll admit it did even to me, but I'll try making sense of this by replacing his choices of metaphors with more literal words, and maybe that will make it make sense. At least to me it did. Notwithstanding, I'll replace the word fever with desire and gambling with trade, and suddenly all he says here makes sense. Satisfying one's desires is all life is about, so in a sense, life itself involves trading your desires for that of others. Take for instance, one of the basest of human desires, food. You trade your desire to sate your hunger or a particular taste that gives you the most reward hormone for the seller's money, which is his desire from you, which in turn could just be a medium for them to go on to attain their actual desires. Now apply that to every facet of life and you see life is just gambling, spurred by fever, even relationships themselves. And I believe the strongest manifestation of desire is love, not lust or hunger, because there is a primal component of living you try sating through sex, or in the case of food, the need for energy, growth, or alleviating the pain from the sensation of hunger. Love is purely mental, and even at its most selfless form, it's still a way for you to intend to sate that desire you have for them to be cared for, healthy, appreciated, in short, loved. So the ultimate control you can have over anyone is holding their love, as it is detached from every compulsion of theirs they have no control over, the likes of lust, hunger, and so on. Hence love itself is control, and he wants to control the country's fever through the purest form of his exchange, which is gambling, and through that he will be controlling the country's love and be in control of the country at large. And so, fever is gambling, and gambling is life, and love is control. But before that, gambling will need to be normalized in order to attain a stage where everyone willingly indulges and wear their desires for all forms of vanity on their sleeves in that purest form all the time because they believe they are in control, which will lead to a gambling addiction epidemic, which is synonymous with his control, as the hottest spot for that will be his fight club. Now back to topic. What you don't realize is even this straight to the truth explanation he gives Yuji is his second attempt at conning him, because the best way to counter an honest fellow's expose of your rules is giving them the straight truth in order to return that illusion of control. These attempts would have worked on anyone with any sense of self, hence the need to indulge vanity, but Yuji Poshubia is the antithesis of what he searches for, as he has no fever of his own and has willingly offered his control on even his own life to serve the Jujutsu Society as a cog in the system. Something Hakari only finds out later when he says he senses no fever at all from Yuji and concludes that he is boring until, in a surprise turn of events, Yuji's cog resolve showed to him how even a cog itself can be a form of fever. And of course, the restless gambler seized this opportunity to try for the last time by having them still agree to help him with his Fight Club plan in exchange for him helping them win the calling game, giving them the illusion of equal control by going along with their plans until they achieve his end of legalizing the Fight Club, which will be the ultimate jackpot, as his end result for that is controlling the whole nation at large. Something he doubles his efforts on by overselling to the point of meekness after finding out Megumi is the new Zenin head, a surefire way to his plan's success. This is the last panel of him before the reveal, and you can see he was still smug despite agreeing verses after. He also says something interesting to Yuji about needing capable pawns earlier. This is something he's been trying with every opponent of his throughout the series so far, from the deal he made with Yuji and Megumi to his post-fight interactions with Charles and Kashimo. He first beats them, then tries playing to their favors, starting by offering Kashimo a deal to fight Sukuna, something he used to keep the psychopath in check, all while letting him keep his delusion of being in control. Next is offering to read Charles' manga, which was unfortunately non-existent, as he was a noob, but the fever addict is as restless as always, so he immediately follows up by persuading him to make a manga as soon as possible. Again, the illusion of control on Charles we've seen paid off with Yuta already having his technique copied, though Hakari's goals are ultimately just actively recruiting exciting pawns for his Fight Club he intends to use to control the country's fever. Unfortunately, that isn't possible with Kashimo anymore, so once again you see fever is gambling, gambling is life, and love is control. This isn't a new concept, by the way, it is classic manipulation. For those familiar with One Piece, we see this with Doflamingo and how he keeps his family in check by giving them these little rewards in line with their idiosyncrasies. This is a common trait of leaders, be it mob bosses or royalties, to ensure both simultaneous control and loyalty from their underlings. A person whose ultimate desire is the control of others must have the most evasion towards being under others' control. At best, he'll give them the illusion of it, which I believe started from way back when he got suspended, because to the Jujutsu Society, he's under their control, hence the suspension. A form of showing said control by temporarily taking away his membership. But when looked upon from his perspective, in actuality, they gave him the ultimate freedom to set his plans into motion without the littlest control of even knowing his whereabouts, much less controlling him. Meanwhile, on the other hand, he intends to only come back when his institution of a Fight Club has been established and legalized. That way, at worst, the only form of control they will have over him is mutualistic, though considering the factors currently at play, the higher ups all dead, Zenin clan wiped out, Kamo clan all disbanded but in name, Gojo, he may end up controlling the Jujutsu Society too in no time, once he controls the fever of most sorcerers to mine abundant pawns for the Fight Club. When you consider the fact that the basest desires of most Jujutsu sorcerers entails being given the chance to glamorize their techniques, which are mostly combative by design, it becomes obvious how a legal Fight Club is a match made in heaven for the Jujutsu world. So back to my earlier questions about who he is. When we consider all these aspects of him and some key instances like comparing the sealing of Gojo and Yaga's death, the teacher's dearest to him, to a manga incident, treating Megumi's position more importantly than said death of Yaga or Gojo's sealing, smiling and jumping in after Gojo's death, we can surmise he's all of these, which for any other person will be contradictory, but for a person whose pleasure comes from controlling the fever of others or love depending, it makes sense why he's both simultaneously this apathetic and empathic to people's tragedies and desires respectively. And of course, Kirara most especially is aware of this and goes on with him voluntarily as her fever entails seeing him fired up, so it's mutualistic in the end. In a sense, he's an anti-villain seen from a positive perspective, because controlling people isn't a good thing no matter what he aims with it, but the method leaves everyone happy, though the sustainability of such a society where everyone's fever is in such a person's control can be argued to be impossible, as it's anarchic by design. In a sense, he's Satan in this idiosyncrasy of his, but enough about his character, let's discuss his powers. Firstly, what is Hakari's technique? Before we even knew what it was, we were told by Panda and Kirara that his technique is the prime example of the modern forms of Jujutsu interpretation the higher-ups hated. Hence, he was always ostracized for it. But then, what is this power of his? Well, the translations vary. In some, they say his curse technique is ideal death gamble and it served to grant him a jackpot. In others, they say that's his domain alone. But most recently, Kusakabe said both he and Higurama have their curse techniques kind of conjoined with their domains as a package deal. This is most likely the closest to the truth. But regardless of which interpretation serves truest, we know his ultimate aim is to be handed the jackpot, which entails him being rewarded infinite cost energy. Now this sounds impressive, which it actually is, but the reaction from the fandom have soured ever since they realized all it did was grant him automatic reverse cost technique, which for the simple-minded, I get why that could be the case. But once you deep it, in a world where the currency of might is literally cost energy, bar a few exceptions like Maki and Toji, the most busted hack anyone could pull is having infinite amounts of it. Of course, automatic regeneration and high cost energy reinforcement are what he could pull from it for now. But by the end of this video, you will see how this is just the start of it. And of course, all this traces back into his character and his gambling way of life, which entails always aiming for the biggest lottery. In fact, his curse technique and all fights we've seen from him have been a microcosm of his idiosyncrasies we discussed in the first half of this video. His domain basically gives those caught in it the illusion of playing a game of cat and mouse that involves either killing or immobilizing him before he gets a jackpot. Hence to them, the only freedom they are denied is that they are forced to indulge him in this while retaining all the freedom of being able to kill him. But as we know, Hakari from his literal intro is the gambling house owner and decides the outcome from behind the scenes. The only difference here being the fact he also partakes in it as a player too while retaining the strings of the owner. I can go into the ins and outs of his powers in specifics, but for the sake of not confusing ourselves, I'll just highlight some facts about them and clear some misconceptions. Firstly, his domain involves loops of pachinko parlor games made by his original ideas, which involves mixing his hobbies into different sections like manga characters or tropes and so on. These games involve a normal mode, increased probability mode, and false spin modes, all with varying chances of jackpot, with the increased probability mode being the most favorable. The games follow the sequence of the normal mode being the first stage in the first domain expansion. Then any of the three modes can be the first stage in subsequent domain expansions depending on the probabilities. Then using the hype indicators that include balls, train doors or pseudo spins as rolls numbers to lead to rich mode, with varying chances of giving the last accurate number depending on the scenario being played to give the jackpot. These are the brief gist of it, but what's important is knowing once the domain is activated. It's a cat and mouse dynamic between he, the caster, and the trap that involves trying to stop him from reaching jackpot by killing or just immobilizing him so he can't play the games, which won't take him more than 30 loops to reach a jackpot. Anyways, this is the gist of it. Apart from the hype indicators or previews, he can utilize both in and outside his domain, the train does, while the balls and pseudo spins, that is essentially the rewind of time, have been only in the domain so far. So with these informations, you see why Hakari's curse technique is his domain expansion, which has the fastest known activation speed so far, is extremely well refined to win domain tug of wars, involves rendering him hard to kill in the domain and harder, well, nigh impossible to kill in jackpot. Basically so far, it's a self-imposing technique which gives the illusion of a fair play to the opponent. I've seen some theorize about how the jackpot music and his dances are his takes on chants and movement to boost CT, and honestly it makes sense. He's the star of modern Jujutsu technique interpretations, so it is fitting for modern music and dancing, the evolutions to traditional chants and traditional dances, to be his own tool for his technique. Finally, We'll discuss what about him earned him the moniker that is this video's title, the Jujutsu Hacker. This will involve discussing and/or theorizing aspects of his technique that makes him the Jujutsu Hacker, and how it could also evolve into an outward imposing technique too. We know he never learned reversed curse technique, but his jackpot gives him infinite curse energy that made him have an automatic reversed curse technique. The positive of this is, it gave him the best reverse curse technique in the series in the sense that, in its fashion, it's unorthodox and doesn't come from the head, but rather his infinite curse energy ensuring the vessel that serves as its container is an Ubermensch that won't die by constantly retaining tip-top shape. Hence, even the slow adaptation we see he gets, like with the increased speed with every consecutive jackpot he had versus Kashimo, is keeping with this theme, as that just serves to increase his survival chances versus the opponent in front of him who was superior in speed. This little detail also makes just taking his head off with one-shot attacks difficult, as he doesn't need to use his brain to direct it, so he can focus on doing things like expelling cursed energy, while leaving the automatic reverse curse technique to deal with the lethality and speed of an attack as potent as a lightning bolt. Finally, it's also capable of dealing with poisons, something nigh impossible for almost any other sorcerer except him. As you all can see, he has the best reverse curse technique without the ability of being able to perform the orthodox reverse curse technique, basically a hack. This lines up with his poor grades in Tokyo High, but we know he does understand a lot about Jujutsu sorcery. Though he is incapable of performing any advanced techniques beyond his domain, that is his literal curse technique, he is Jujutsu attuned enough to immediately know Kashimo wasn't using his curse technique but only manipulates his cursed energy trait. He immediately deduced the counter to Charles' future sight is attacking his blind spots. He knows enough chemistry to plan exhausting Kashimo's cursed energy via electrolysis in the lake, impromptu binding vows to survive explosions, and his whole Fight Club scheme all clearly show he isn't dumb in any way, be it science, logic, jujutsu, or con schemes. Like rebels, hackers hate being under the control of corporations. Same goes for Hakari and his rejection of the Jujutsu society. Like hackers are mostly dropouts and can't program basic softwares, much less advanced inventions, but tinker with complex systems by their unorthodox knowledge to make massive breakthroughs. So too does Hakari when it comes to his reverse curse technique, as we know is the best in this series. This is also why I believe he learned nothing new in the timeskip, even if he understands how the things he is being shown work. After all, knowing isn't the same as internalizing and being able to do what is shown. Now, these are the positives. I'll discuss the one massive negative that will segue into his evolution, which is the fact he can't use his curse technique, which is his domain in jackpot mode. The narrator doesn't give any comments about if it's a part of his domain rule set or any other thing for that matter. Only thing we have is Hakari himself outright saying he can't, without giving any reasons to why that is. So I'll give two reasons that could be the cause. Domain rule set. This is unlikely, as every essential part of his domain or curse technique that have come into play so far have been explained by the narrator, and I find it hard to believe such a monumental rule will be overlooked by the narrator, especially since it's something even Hakari the user would prefer not being the case. We see him comment on how he can't expand it during jackpot, in a desperate situation where he'd rather have the time of his immortality prolonged versus a deadly opponent like Kashimo. But anyways, if this is the case, the solution I see to this will be hitting a black flash that will give him a much more intrinsic understanding about cost energy and his cost technique. Something we've seen happen to Mahito back in Shibuya. Black Flash could spur him into an epiphany where he not only has a new interpretation to his cost technique that will do away with this restriction, but also could give him a massive boost in his cost energy output, which is no joke for one whose body houses an infinite amount. This is again unlikely because of it, as we are told his jackpot replenishes his cost technique during the round, minutes 11 seconds. Now cost technique burnout shouldn't take so long to heal like we've seen with Ryu, the fastest, Megumi, Yuta, Mahito, Kenjaku, all taking but mere moments. So why does his take 4 minutes 11 seconds long? Now I'll use another character we've seen in a similar predicament as template, Satoru Gojo. He too couldn't have his cost technique back for almost a chapter after expanding his domain versus Sukuna, which could have even been longer. Now, what's common between that situation of his and Hakari's is they both are constantly expending reverse curse technique at maximum output. I deduce the fact reverse curse technique requires twice over the amount of cost energy consumption curse techniques require for normal output. It doesn't leave spare cost energy for cooldown, and so the burnout takes longer. Now we'll discuss the solution which Gojo has shown and the key element to Hakari's first step of evolution: destroying the black box and using reverse curse technique to restore it. A flawed solution clearly, but the boost it brings in for Hakari is a worthwhile evolution if it means he gets to have at least 25 minutes of simultaneous jackpot. But that's not all, it gives him access to his previous 2. Though I could also see him finding workarounds to bypass these drawbacks by binding vows, a department he's shown mastery in. Now the ability to use his domain and previews on jackpots still do not seem like massive boost, until you remember the current principle of his reverse curse technique is the infinite cost energy, ensuring the vessel for it is an ubermensch that won't die. Hence, like I said earlier in the video, the slow adaptation we see he gets in increased speed with every consecutive jackpot he had versus Kashmo, as that just increases his survival chances versus the faster opponents the longer he lives. If he channels that to his cost technique too, they will be so efficiently busted, as the infinite cost energy will keep them at maximum efficacy like it does his body. In theory, the train doors could be as deadly as guillotines, the balls as deadly as cannon or tank balls, the pseudo spins time warping longer sequences, and finally, boosting an already super refined domain to further refinement. Another testament to how he bypasses the orthodox training or grinding to maximize efficiency unlike every other sorcerer, but rather lets his infinite cost energy do the work without going through the learning process as orthodox sorcery geniuses like Sukuna, Gojo, Kenjaku, Yuta have all done. Ultimately, this is where his hacker moniker pays off in his evolution too. Maximum efficiency of cost technique and domains without the usual groundwork. A top tier by way of hack and not through the millennia-old standard form of Jujutsu. Moreover, there's like 3 more evolutions I can think of, though one or all 3 could sound like fan fictions, but regardless, I'll mention them briefly. Firstly, his cost energy trait. We currently know it has the sharp or rough sensation after effect. In the chance it has to do with his fired up or fever gimmick, I theorize that could mean once he reaches a certain threshold of adrenaline high, it becomes lethal instead of just the stinging after effect it is right now. That will not only make his kicking and punching much more deathly, but also those jackpot boosted hype indicators I talked about earlier. Secondly, shrinking his domain. He has shown proficiency with barrier coordinate from how he moved it to the lake versus Kashimo or left it hanging versus Uraumi. We've seen Gojo shrink his domain to the size of less than a basketball thanks to his prison rim experience. What if he pushed that further to an atomic level? It's unlikely, but with the principle to which Jackpot Hakari's infinite cost energy works, which will be an automatic process once he gives the direction, I leave that in the cast of slim possibilities still. That way, it can survive even a malevolent shrine clash too. Lastly, open barrier. I don't have much on this other than the fact the only further evolution I see for Hakari's cost technique is he himself becoming his cost technique, taking the domain being his cost technique a step further. This way, when he spawns his true essence, which is his domain, being open will make it both an extension of his world and the internalization of the real world, considering his domain involves modern themes and infrastructure. It will seem like his mind, which is his domain, is materialized on the real world that way, hence his domain is himself, and he is his cost technique. To round this evolution bit up, in a nutshell, his evolution lays in the reduction of steps we've been told is the essence of Jujutsu, but since he himself is unorthodox, it lays in him reducing the clunkiness of his cost technique by conjoining stages, like with how casting domains while simultaneously in jackpot overlaps both stages, or, in my fanfiction, an open barrier altogether which renders him the technique itself. An unorthodox solution by the Jujutsu hacker for sure. Finally, I'll briefly gloss over his relationship with luck. Luck as a power set is an obtrusive concept which is tricky, but luckily, I do not think it's a part of his power set. So for now, I'll just add my interpretation to a statement he made about luck. I use skill to grab a hold of luck. A Roman philosopher by the name Seneca is famously quoted for saying this about luck. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. This quote couldn't be truer for Hakari. As you can see, from his Fight Club plans to his domain rule sets, be it they are true or yet just another layer to his schemes, down to the evolutions I theorized, one fact is clear: they are set up in the manner wherein any opportunity that presents itself will be absolutely capitalized upon. And so, this is the meaning I take for what his dynamic with Locke is when we account for his character as a whole. Anyways, that is all. This is why I titled this video The Jujutsu Hacker. And these are mostly just fun ideas mixed with a read of his character, so I don't expect any to definitely happen, much less for all to. Also, one last thing before I check out. There is a hot topic regarding Hakari's lineage being Blasian or just Japanese. I don't got much to say on that, other than, as Jujutsu High students, both he and Kirara weren't allowed to dress up or make up however they liked under the scrutiny of the conservative higher-ups of the Jujutsu society. So there's a very high chance the afro dress in this picture is his natural hair, which will mean he's Blasian. Anyways, thanks for watching this video. Goodbye.